Hey everyone, Andy here at MVP Java. So in this tutorial we're going to concentrate on Guice Providers, which are pretty much factories. So in the last video we took a look at how to inject a single implementation into our application using Guice. If you haven't looked at that, I'll include the links as an annotation and in the description below. But in this case here, we're interested in providers because we have more than one implementation. So we need to make a decision on which one to inject. Now that decision could be made on some runtime parameter. It could be made on user input. So that's where providers are going to shine. Okay, because up to now we've known our dependencies up front. If you want to call them direct dependencies or hard-coded dependencies. So Guice knew all about them up front, injected everything for us, got out of the way, and our application was able to run with all those dependencies already injected into them. But in this case now, it's different because we want more of that runtime behavior to decide which implementation is going to get returned. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at something called, free providers, meaning that Guice automatically gives you a provider of a certain type. And that's pretty useful because providers also allow you to get lazy or late instantiation. You might have some implementations that are very expensive to create and you don't want to instantiate every single implementation up front, and you want those to only be instantiated at a certain point when the request comes in for it. And so providers allow you to, instead of inject the implementation, you inject the provider, you inject the factory, which means that it's much less memory intensive to inject a factory reference than it is to inject all the implementations behind it. So at runtime, the factory method get will get called, and your implementation will get instantiated at that point on a as per needed basis. Okay, so we'll take a look at that as our first example, and then we're going to see how we want to run our own or implement our own providers when the logic, is going to get more complex, because the free providers, there is no logic in there. You only get the late instantiation for free there. So once you want to get that programmatic logic in there, we'll roll our own. And then after, we'll see some shortcuts with the annotations to bypass some configurations, kind of ease the configuration. Okay, so let's see here, Implicit Provider. So it's the same example as the last tutorial. If we take a look here at the interface, I haven't really changed anything here. I'm still telling Guice to dependency inject this specific implementation early bird discount whenever it sees the type discountable. And I don't even have to, like I said in the last video, mention that in a module, in a Guice module. In fact, I don't even have a Guice module in this project here, as you can see. Okay. Then after that, we have my checkout service. And in the checkout service, you'll see that I'm using Google Inject here to inject my discountable. However, it's a provider of discountable. Now, I haven't told Guice how to do this, right? You didn't see me say anything or configure anything in a Guice module. Anyways, I don't even have one. So this is what is injected for us for free. So Inject sees this and says, okay, I see that you haven't configured one, you haven't binded one, you haven't written one, so I'm going to provide this for you. And I save it inside an instance variable. And only when the request comes in for a checkout do I call my factory method get, and then I call my get discount. Okay, so in this case here, you have to go through the factory to get through your instance, but what you gain is that late or lazy instantiation. Okay, so you get that out of the box for free, and it's pretty much for any type. So if we go to our main, our start point where we bootstrap everything and we create our Guice injector, like I said, it's kind of like a container. They don't really like being called a container, but for tutorial purposes, if it helps you understand it like that, that's fine. And then we get access to anything that it can see. So our checkout service has the inject in there that I showed you, and that provider is in there, and that's what gets injected, not the implementation. The provider gets injected. And only when we do the call for the checkout, that's when the provider gets invoked, the get method gets called that I showed you, and then it'll instantiate, in this case, the early bird discount. And if we run this, right? The early bird discount, I believe, is 25%. We just passed in 100. So simple math here, we have 100 minus 25%, 75, okay? So that's what's referred to as you're getting your free provider from Google Guice. And again, what that does is allow you to get that late binding or late instantiation of that implementation that you're looking for in this case. But here's the question. How do I make a decision on which implementation that I want? Right now, I kind of hard-coded it, to one implementation. So we're going to continue on our path here. Let me close these guys. And we're going to see how we're going to roll our own, just like I said in point number 2 of our outline. Okay, so that's an explicit provider. Now you'll notice that in my discountable, I didn't hard code, I didn't say implemented by. Okay, so it's just your run-of-the-mill interface. I got a couple of implementations. I got my early bird, I got my night owl discount, and I got my no discount. All right, so 25%, 35%, and 0%. And over here in my checkout service, right, you'll notice that I have a couple of commented out things because I'm going to go back and forth on 2 concepts here. But forget about the comments for now. The rest is the same. Nothing has changed in this checkout service, right, besides those comments. And what's really changed here, though, is that I have a class that I created called Discount Provider, okay, and it implements Guice's provider of the type discountable in this case. So I am coming up, I'm rolling my own factory, okay, and as our first example, right, you have to override the get factory method. I say what I want to return, and I'm just hard coding it for now just to get the mechanics into place, and then after that we'll come up with something nicer. Okay, so the early bird discount is hard coded there. Now since I have my own provider, I have to have Guice know about it. So I go back into my module, all right, and instead of binding, if you remember the last video, I was binding a discountable. In this case, it's an interface type, right? I was binding it just to, and then to an implementation, right? Well, this time I'm binding it to a provider. And this is the class that I just showed you that implements the provider interface. So what Guice is going to do is the next time it sees this type, it's going to inject a provider instead. And that's what you're going to call, at runtime, you're going to call the get method to go get you that implementation. So if we go here now and we go main, and again, the main hasn't changed, right? It's the same thing, right? So you go here, you run. You still get 25% because we said the early bird discount, right? If you don't believe me, come here and let's say, what's the other one? The night owl. Come up with these nice names. Night owl. All right, so night owl, here we go, should be 35. Don't make a fool out of me. Hey, and 35 we go. Okay, so that provider gets injected, and at the time when that discount method gets called, as we saw, the get method gets called, right? And it goes and gets whatever the get method decided to return in this case. So we hard coded it. Now, you know, that's okay to get the mechanics into place and how it all fits together, but really we want something more complicated than that. We want to have some programmatic logic, right? So let me comment this guy out here. Let me go here. Boy, okay. I am awful with the mouse sometimes. Let me just scroll down here. Okay. Boom. Okay, so what have I done here? All right, let me fix up these imports. All right, you notice my get method now is more complex, right? I'm getting basically the current hour on this machine, and I'm trying to figure out if it's the early morning hours, which is a private method. So if it's between 5 and 9, 0 being midnight, then it'll return true, and then it'll get the early bird discount. If it's late at night, so from midnight to 4 a.m., then you get the night owl discount. And if you're not any one of those, which is actually my case right now, it's not too early, it's not very late here, then I should get this no discount, which is 0. Okay. Now, if I go back to my checkout service, nothing's going to change here. I'm still injecting my provider that you see here in my module. So really, if I go to my main here and I run this, again, now that programmatic logic should come into place, and there you go, 0, right? Because it's like 10 a.m. here right now, 10 p.m. sorry, here right now. So I don't fall within the get methods logic of the early bird or the night owl implementation, right? I keep falling in here. So again, just to make sure that this is not smoke and mirrors here. Now here, if I hard code that to night owl for my case, and I come here and I say run, should get 35%. And here we go, 35%, right? So let me undo that. So there's a case where you have programmatic logic in place, and you even are taking advantage of late instantiation. Okay, now I put these comments here because what if you didn't really care about the late instantiation in this case, right? Like those objects that I'm creating right now, they're really not expensive. I don't really care for them to be injected late or anything like that. So what you could do is, if you don't want to pollute your code base with these provider classes all over the place, you could come here, right, and just specify the interface as the type discountable, all right, and there we go. So now I'm not going through the get method, I'm just going straight to my implementation that will be injected for me anyways, right? And if I run this guy, right, same old deal. Okay, so it's a decision that you could make, right? Because a lot of the examples that you're gonna see, they're always talking about injecting a provider, right? But if you don't want to go through the factory method and you just want it to be called for you, right? You can just leave your interface as a type there, and the magic still happens in the background. You just don't have that dependency in your business logic now on a provider class. So it's really up to you in this case. Okay, so just took a look at programmatically defining our own implementation, in this case based on some variable which was the current hour. Okay, so this gives rise to some other questions, right? Like, how do I go about injecting a dependency into the provider, or what if the user makes a decision? Can I, like from the request, or selects a drop-down list and that selects another implementation? How do I get that information to the provider? Well, those are, now we're getting into the, I guess, the really more advanced stuff of the provider, which I will cover. It's just, there's such big examples to cover in this video that I've decided to put that specific part in the next video, because there's still a couple of things that I want to cover on the provider, but we are going to address them on that next video that I'm talking about. Okay, so step at a time. Let's take a look at provides and provided by. All right, so let me take a look at, close all these here. And let's go take a look at those. Provides, there we go. So why would I want to use the provides annotation, right? If we go take a look at the Guice module, you'll notice that I have commented everything out of my configure. I'm actually not binding anything explicitly. And I'm decided that I'm going to specify my provider within my module, right? If you take a look at the package structure here, you don't see that discount provider, right? Right here, I don't see it there. That's because I took it out just to showcase that. So if your get method does not have, if you don't have any dependencies being injected into you, basically, which I said I would cover the next video, right? Right now we're kind of using some system data that we can get locally within the get method. We're not getting something externally, right? So if it's not getting injected anything into it, and the logic is simple enough, then you can actually include it in your module in one place. All right, so all I've done is I've copied and pasted the code that we saw in the discount provider. I pasted it here. And what Juice does is it says, okay, this is a provider, and I'm going to map that provider to this type. So before we were saying, hey, bind this type to this provider, it's still doing that, but through the annotation, saying, hey, I'm binding this type to this provider. Now, obviously, this is not a class, but it's going to create that class for you and just put the code that you have in the get method in its get method. It'll call yours. All right. So if you do that, and that's the only change I've made, besides removing the provider module to showcase that, then if you just run this guy, again, because I'm about 10-15 at night, I get 0. And just to make sure that, let me get the early bird discount here, that, you know, I'm telling the truth, 25%, okay? So it's just a convenience. It's a way to include your providers in the same module so you don't have to go looking for them. It's a centralized place. Again, only meant for simple logic. You don't want to have a humongous, you know, hundreds of files, hundreds of lines rather, in your get method here. I would definitely put that in its own implementation class and bind it like we saw before. And you're not injecting anything into the provider. All right. So that's the provides way of doing things. And again, you can do the same thing I talked about before in the service class, right? You can, again, comment those out and go for the providers, or just inject the interface as a type, whatever you like, right? Choose your preference there. All right, last one on the list, right? We said we'd take a look at provided by. So if you saw the last video and you understood implemented by, chances are this is going to be real easy for you to understand, okay? So provided by annotation. If we take a look at our discount provider, I put the discount provider back in there with the code that we saw in the explicit provider example, all right? So everything is kind of back to normal. What's changed is my discountable interface. Over here, I am saying at provided by, I'm actually telling it who's going to be providing the implementation for this interface, programmatically speaking, okay? So when you do something like that, again, annotations, ease of use. If you go take a look at your Juice module, you didn't bind anything because the annotation is doing that configuration for you. So since the annotation is saying that the provider is going to decide, then you got to go to the provider and say, well, how does it decide? You look at your get method. Again, in my case, it's always going to pick, well, not always, but unless this video goes on for another couple of hours, it's going to pick the no discount, right? Just my luck. So run, should be no discount, right? And then we've got the good old trust but verify, right? I can say anything in this video and make it work, and you'd believe me, right? So let's double check here. There we go, 35. So we're good to go there. So there's another way of helping ease the, you know, the configuration on you by having those annotations there. I like having everything in the module right there. I don't mind having separate classes for my providers as well. Again, I'm not a big fan of having configuration spread out in Java code and in annotations. I try to keep it as much as possible in the Java code. That's why I love Juice so much, because as you can even see in this module, if we go back here, I didn't put it there, but in the module before where I had the provides, I mean, you had those private methods, right, just lying there. I mean, that's nice. It's just Java code. You can structure it nicely as you want. So, all right, let me save that. That basically concludes this video that we said we would cover all this stuff, all right? So kind of like an intermediate level of providers here. Let's take a look at some follow-up questions that you probably have. I know I had them when I first took a look at this stuff. So how do I make the provider know about the existing implementations? Ah, yes, right? If we take a look at our provider, we're hard coding it all, right? We have to know the implementations in advance, right? So if I create another implementation called a lunch hour discount or something like that, I mean, I have to come back in here and I have to actually say new, okay? Now, if you want to have a sort of a map, if you will, or a configuration of all your implementations and have Guice inject them into your provider, well, that would be a lot easier to maintain. And so we're going to take a look at the map binder in the next video, and that's what I mean. You might want to inject some bindings, some dependencies into your provider. This is a big one. This is one that I use quite a bit. Another question is, well, just in general, how do I inject a dependency? Well, we covered inject in the last video, and it's pretty much the same thing, okay? So we're going to take a look at it again because we're going to have to inject the map binder. And this is the mother of all questions over here, right? This is the one that I think if someone can show you how to do this, then it's finished, it's done, right? So how can I inject runtime data into a provider in order to choose the implementation at runtime? So we did do that, but it's not really runtime data in the sense where it's coming from the user or it's on a per request basis. In terms of like a request coming in, I was using the current time, which is good, but in this case here, what if it was somebody selecting something on a drop-down list and that dictated what implementation got ejected, right? That's really the mother of all runtime data. So in this case here, you can go ahead. Well, a lot of people talk about assisted inject to do this, and it's true and it's not true. Yes, we can use assisted inject or assisted, as we're going to see in the next video, and that does help for certain cases. But if you're trying to get something like an abstract factory working like a factory of factories, there's really nothing in Guice that I've come across that'll really help you with that. You kind of have to roll your own factory and then use assist in there or a map binder. We're going to cover that in the next video. It's a pretty big thing, so that's why I didn't want to make this video much longer than I feel it already is. Actually long enough. It starts about 22 minutes already. So we're going to cover that in the next video, but already you guys know enough to be very pragmatic with your providers, and you can definitely start practicing with them. And by the next time I get this video ready, which will be next week, probably a week to the day, you'll know the A to Z about it. Okay, so I hope you guys like the video. Maybe check out subscribe or give it a thumbs up or something like that. Give me some motivation to continue. But hope you guys like the video, and I will see you next week, guys. Take care.